woman moved away to Alaska. And at that time, I wrote the first 4 chapters of Volume 1. Not even knowing if it was going to go anywhere. I said it might just go into a drawer in my desk somewhere. I thought in the beginning it was just going to be an interesting chapter in a book of miscellaneous regressions down the road. So that chapter turned into 3 volumes, but I didn't know it at that time. So at that time, I wanted to have my mindset on paper, so I wrote the first 4 chapters. The books are called Conversations with Nostradamus, and there's 3 volumes in the set. And I'm just talking about the beginning of the first volume. And I know there's not going to be time to go into the whole thing tonight, but I did want to tell you some so we can get started on this and probably continue it on another night that I don't have a guest. So then you'll have to wait, I guess, to get the rest of the story, because I've spoken on this story as long as a week when I'm giving seminars. Anyway, the woman moved away, and I didn't know if anything was going to happen or not. But it was 3 months before I decided to try it with another one of my very good subjects. She was a music student at the university, and we had worked on many experiments with her. She was excellent. She was able to do what is now called remote viewing. The time I was doing it, it was just an experiment. I didn't know what it was called. But I would go to her house, and I would have her look at something that was occurring, even on the other side of the world, and she was able to tell me what was happening. At that time, one of the experiments that we had done before the Nostradamus material was the morning of the Chernobyl disaster. And I came to her house just to, as I always did, we used to do experimentation. And she didn't even have the TV on yet. She didn't know anything about what was going on in the world. And I asked her then, do you want to try an experiment? She said, yeah, just tell me what we did after I wake up. So at that time, I had her go in trance to go to Russia and tell me what was happening at that time. Well, we knew more on that morning than the rest of the people of the world knew. It was many years later, whenever the Russians finally released a lot of the facts and the information about what really happened on that morning. But we were able to see it all, and she told me about there were a lot more people had died, there was a lot more damage, and a whole lot more than what was in the papers at the time. But we were able to find out on that morning exactly what was going on. So she was a wonderful subject, and I knew she could do experiments of this type. So when I went to her house, it was late at night, and I told her, well, you want to try another experiment? She said, sure. So I followed Nostradamus' instructions, and not knowing what was going to happen, she found him again, the same room, the same house, sitting at the same desk that he had been when we were first talking with the first woman. And he said, well, I've been waiting for you. Now can we get started? So through Brenda, we were able to interpret over 300 of the prophecies by only meeting once a week. And I would just meet, I would open the book. I didn't know what I was reading because they are much too complicated. I would open the book, read the quatrain, the 4 lines, check it off, and he would give me the answer immediately. It was very seldom that I had to repeat anything to him. We had it immediately. I would check it off and go to the next one. And it didn't matter where I would have started in the book, because I found out later that Nostradamus did not put them in any order. The order they are in the books, he said he threw dice to figure out how to arrange them. So they are in no particular order. And so I just would check it off and go on to the next one. At the height of my work with Brenda, the music student, we were interpreting 30 quatrains in an hour. That is absolutely impossible for the human mind to think that fast, especially on puzzles as complicated as this. I would read it, he would give me the answer, and I would go on to the next one. It was absolutely amazing, and I know there's no way that it could have been happening by fraud. She didn't even take time to think. She just gave me the answer, went on to the next. The only time he ever asked for me to repeat it was if he said there was a mistake in the way it was written down. And he found many of these. He found where some had been combined together, they were not his original work, and some of them had been misinterpreted. It was the only time he ever asked me to repeat anything. And my job was to put all of this together, and it took a computer to do it. There were many times I would ask him, does this quatrain go with the one we covered last week? He said, that's your problem. You're the one that's going to have to put it together. All I can give you is the information. You have to put it together and arrange it. So it took a computer, and volume 1 was over 300 of the quatrains we did. Now, I think the next time we meet, I will go over the other parts of this, because you figure if you got 3 volumes in a story, it took a lot of twists and turns. It wasn't just these 2 women. There were there are other people that were brought into this. So by the time I completed it all, I had worked with 12 different people. So it's not just one person sitting down and channeling something. This was a lot of people involved. They were all telling me the same scenario, worded a little bit differently, but they were all telling me the same thing was going to happen to the world. They just added little more bits and pieces to the entire story and the entire puzzle. So it's quite an amazing story, and that was my job then to put it all together. But one thing I want to make clear that people have a hard time with, and I did in the beginning, is through all the people I worked with, he always said, when we are communicating, you are not speaking to the dead. I'm not a spirit floating around out here somewhere. When we are communicating, I'm alive, living in my house in France, writing the prophecies. He also knew that I was not dead, either that I was alive in the future. He was so adamant about this, he didn't want me to tell him his own future. He didn't want to know how he was going to die. That's because he was alive, living at that time, and he wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to pass the information of his visions on to us, but he didn't want to know anything about himself. Now, when I'm giving a lecture on this, I always ask the audience, if he's saying he is alive while I am alive, and I am communicating with him in his time period while he sits at that desk in his own home, if that is true, then what metaphysical concept does that bring up? It brings up the metaphysical concept of simultaneous time, that there is no time. That time is an illusion. And now I've had much, much more information about it than I had back then. Then I couldn't explain it. But the ETs have even told me time is an illusion. And they said until mankind gets out of the being trapped in time, they will never travel in space. The ETs said mankind is probably the only species in the universe that has found a way to measure something that does not exist. So I'll leave it to us to do something like that. But anyway, he is alive when we are communicating with him. And whenever we get into the second part of this story, with John, the astrologer who was helping us, we did interact with him in his life. So I know we were communicating with him while he was alive. All very strange, very unusual, but it did happen. And we have the proof of the 3 books and all of the translation of all 1,000. They are not all, the prophecies are not, quatrains are not all in the 3 volumes, because no book could possibly hold all of the information I was given. I had to pick and choose which ones to put in which book. In the beginning, he said, don't worry about the ones that have already happened. They would only be interesting to those people studying history. He said, focus on now and the next 20 years. Now, this was the end of the 80s, which brings it up to now. He said, focus on the next 20 years. There's going to be more startling things happen to the world in the next 20 years than have ever happened at any time in history before. This is a quite remarkable time we're living in right now, and that's why he wanted us to know these things before it was too late. So in the books, I have put some of the ones relating to the past because I wanted to show his remarkable use of symbolism. But he told me to focus on what was going to happen to the world. And it has resulted in 3 volumes, The Conversations with Nostradamus, and it has been updated several times, and we try to update it on our website because the events keep happening, and they are still happening. Very, very accurate predictions that no one else has ever found the answers to this in all of the other interpreters. But it's we are coming now into the time of this. I've had a lot of people read the books, and then they'll look at the copyright dates, and they said, these books were written before the events began to happen. People will write me and say, I'm reading the books and watching it happen on TV. It's very powerful stuff. So now we are running out of time, and I hate to leave you like that as a cliffhanger, but this will probably be a continuing thing as I go through the rest of my books that I've not discussed. So on the days the nights that I don't have a guest, I will continue with these stories. So the next time I don't have a guest, we will pick up again on the Nostradamus material, and I will tell you the rest of the parts. I want you to remember my website is www.ozarkmountain. Name of my company, Ozark Mountain Publishing. OZARKMT.com. OZARKMT.com. My 800 number is 1-800-935-0045. 1-800-935-0045. You want to know more about the books, about sessions with me, or about my classes. All right, have a good night, and I'll see you next week.